Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at lamed hey roots, roots where in the dictionary the third radical, the lamed of the verb, is a hey. This is not a guttural hey. Those are very rare as the third radical of a root. Let me remind you that the dots and lines that tell you how to pronounce a biblical word are not much more than a millennium old. That's 1,000 years after the Bible itself was finished. In the biblical period itself, they used yud and vav, and at the end of a word, hey, to indicate vowels. Now, the dictionary form of a verb gives us the three letters that we refer to as the root. But with one exception that we'll talk about in a future lesson, what you see in the dictionary is the kal, third masculine singular, perfect, the one form in either perfect or imperfect that is unmarked. It doesn't have any prefixes or suffixes. That's why it's used for the dictionary. And in the kal, third masculine singular perfect, the verbs we're going to talk about today have a hey as their third radical. But it's not a real consonant hey, it's a vowel letter. Really, their third radical, etymologically, was a yud. When you add an ending to that kind of root, the hey drops off, and the yud will sometimes reappear. Why does it work that way? Well, how come the plural of mouse is mice, but the plural of house is not heis? That's just how it is. The bottom line is that verb forms from lamed hey roots are one, very, very common, and two, very, very regular. And they make a lot of sense once you realize that the final hey is really substituting for a yud. I want to start simply by reminding you of an adjective that we learned when we were first looking at final hey, is the adjective yafeh, which means beautiful. And the four forms of this adjective were yafeh, yafa, yafim, yafot. Notice carefully, the eh of yafeh is an ending that drops off before you add the other endings. And now there's one more thing to notice. Whenever you see a word with an eh ending, segol followed by a hey, that word is wearing a big button that says, kiss me, I'm from a lamed hey root. That segol hey, that eh sound at the end of a word, is a sure sign that the third letter of the root is hey. Let's start by using the root ayin sin hey, to make or to do, as our example verb. And since we were just talking about the adjective yafeh, let's begin with the verbal adjective, the participle of ayin sin hey. This is a kal, active participle, so there's an o after the first radical, omer, kotev, and so forth. And our participle also starts that way, with o after the ayin. But instead of the tsere between the second and third radicals, omer, kotev, after our second radical, we have a segol hey ending, oseh. In just the same way, you could have boneh, someone who is building, shoteh, someone who is drinking, ro'eh, someone who is seeing something. For an example, let's look again at the tree we met in Genesis 1:11. Eitz pri, oseh pri lemino, a tree of fruit, construct phrase, a fruit tree, making fruit, oseh pri. Lemino, according to its kind. Oseh is the masculine singular kal participle from the verb asa, to make or to do. And in all of these cases, just like with yafeh, we would drop the eh ending before adding the others. So it's oseh, osa, osim, and osot. The feminine singular omeret form, the one that's commonly used with strong verbs and almost every other root too, doesn't exist with Lamed He verbs because you have to have a third consonant inside that sigol sandwich, and the He is not a consonant. So that's an unnatural form for this particular kind of root. Now the passive participle, the a-u form, like katuv, written. Katuv, kituva, kituvim, kituvot. But look at the Lamed He forms. It's a-u, the normal way, same as for a strong verb, but then yud instead of He. Say asui, like chop suey. And now that we've restored the yud to its original place, we have a consonant we can use. So just add a im ot the normal way. Asui, asuya, asuyim, asuyot. By the way, did you notice that where the kaf of ktuva has a shva, the ayin of asuya has a compound shva? Yes, ayin sin he is a root that's doubly weak. It's a first guttural and a third he. No problemo. The ayin does its thing, the he does its thing, and we know what they're both going to do, and everybody's happy. It's perfectly recognizable. Now let's have a look at the perfect forms. The perfect has endings to tell you the person, gender, and number of the verb, and the he is at the end, so something's got to give. The strong verb always has a patach in between the second and third radicals for I, you, he, and we, and shortens that vowel for she and they. Here's a reminder using shamar, to keep. Now let's add the Lamed He forms for comparison using ra'ah, to see. In the first and second persons, where the strong verb has that patach, the he of a third he root reverts to its original self, a yud. So instead of an a and a consonant, we just have a long vowel e. Shamarti, but ra'iti. That e before the suffix is the sign of a Lamed He root in the perfect. Absolutely diagnostic. If I tell you kaniti, you may have no clue yet what it means, but compare it to ra'iti, and you can easily see that it's a third he verb, kuf nun he, first common singular perfect, kal. Then all you have to do is look it up. We'll see it in context before the end of this lesson. For right now, what I want you to remember is, when you see two root letters followed by an E sound and then a perfect ending, you are looking at a root that falls into this extremely common third he or Lamed He category. In our example using ra'ah, it's ra'iti, ra'ita, ra'it for I and you in the singular, ra'inu, re'item, re'iten for we and you in the plural. Third masculine singular, the he form, is the dictionary form. Kamatz patach in the strong verb, but with the Lamed He verb, that's not a real consonant. It's not pronounced. So that last syllable is open now, and that vowel is a kamatz too. A long ah. He saw ra-ah. In the they form, third common plural, you drop that whole sound before adding on the plural u. So it's ra-u, they saw. Even though we're adding an ending, the ending is a vowel, so the he can't turn into an e sound the way it does in the first and second person. Instead, it just disappears. Ra-u, they saw. Now, the third feminine singular ending. She saw. Normally, you add an a ending and contract the previous vowel, shamar, shamara. But with the Lamed He verb, if I drop the ah ending and then add an ah ending, I'm back to ra'ah, he saw. So the third feminine singular perfect of these lamed he verbs feminizes it by putting a feminine taf, a T sound, before the ah ending. Ra'ata. Shamira, she kept. Ra'ata, she saw. Notice that in ra'ah, our second consonant is a guttural aleph, so it's not a simple shva, but a compound shva. In other roots, it's a regular simple shva, of course. Asta, she did or she made. Anta, she answered. Alta, she went up or it went up. You remember that there's no neuter in Hebrew, so it can always be a feminine noun instead of a human she that's doing these verbs. And especially hayita, she or it was. Hayiti, hayita, hayit, haya, and hayita. V'haaretz hayita tohu vavohu, and the earth was wild and waste. Plurals. Hayinu, hayitem, hayitem doesn't exist. Hayu. Hayu, of course, does exist, it's very common. Deuteronomy 6:21 says, when your children ask you, why do you follow all these commandments? The answer is, Avadim hayinu leFaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Now, instead of serving Pharaoh, we serve God and we have to do what he says. Hayinu, we were, just like Ra'inu, we saw. Baninu, we built, etc., etc., etc. It's a good idea to practice replacing one root with another using the same kind of root to remind yourself how that category of verb works. Remember God's question from Genesis 3:13? Vayomer Adonai Elohim la'isha, ma zot asit? The Lord God said to the woman, ma zot asit? What is this you have done, you feminine singular person? And in verse 14, he says to the snake, ki asita zot, because you did this, you lose your parking privileges. Snake is a masculine word, asita, rather than asit for the isha. Because the hey of a third hey root is at the end, and all the action with a perfect verb takes place at the end of the verb, there's a big difference between lamed hey verbs and strong verbs in the perfect. Once you learn it, it's easy, I promise, but I have to admit it's different. With imperfect verbs, to me it seems much easier. Again, it's different from the strong verb, but it's got that segol hey, that ending that always says, I'm a lamed hey root. Let's compare. Instead of o consonant, it's segol hey. When there's a vowel ending on the imperfect, drop the before you add it. Tir'i, tir'u, yir'u. If the beginning of the verb is normal, yir or tir, but you only see two consonants and then suddenly an ending, the missing letter is a hey at the end of the root. Notice that in tir'ena, with a consonant starting the ending, the original yud of this root reappears. Let's look at a couple of examples in their natural habitat. Here's what Joseph's brothers said when they decided to kill him. Nir'eh ma yihyu chalomotav. Chalom is a dream. Nir'eh, we'll see, first common plural, imperfect, and all the root letters are there. Ma yihyu chalomotav, what his dreams will be, yihyu. Notice, by the way, that the first hey of haya does not act like a guttural in the imperfect. And that also goes for its matching verb, chaya with chet, to live, not to reside somewhere, but to be alive. Remember it? Let's go back for a minute to the genealogies in Genesis 5, where you practiced your numbers. You did, didn't you? Vaychi Metushelach Sheva Ushmonim Shana Ume'at Shana. And Methuselah lived 187 years and fathered sons and daughters. All told, Vayihyu Kol Yemei Metushelach Tesha Veshishim Shana Ucha Me'ot Shana. Yihyu, they will be, Vayihyu, and they were. Remember that Vav plus Patach plus Dagesh converts an imperfect verb to a past tense meaning. Kol Yemei Metushelach, all the days of Methuselah, 969 years. Haya, to be, and Chaya, to be alive, work the same way. And there's one more thing I'd better show you right now. Genesis 41:36, where Joseph is storing away some food, Lesheva Shnei Hara'av, Asher Tihiena Be'eretz Mitzrayim. Shana, a year, but years in the plural, shanim, so the construct is shnei. This is not the construct of shnayim, the number 2. It's the construct of shanim, years. Despite the ending, it's a feminine noun. Lesheva Shnei Hara'av, for the 7 years of famine, Asher Tihiena, that would be. And this is why I'm showing it to you. The na of Tihiena is spelled here, and often, not with a final hey, but with a kamatz after the final nun, under the final nun. Different spelling for the same sound, and biblical spelling is not standardized, so you have to be ready for it. I do want to take a minute to remind you about asuya, the feminine singular passive participle, something that was made or was done. We said back then that ayin sin hey is a root that's doubly weak. It's a pei guttural and a lamed hey. And I also told you that the 2 weak root letters wouldn't interfere with each other. If you understand both kinds of roots, you won't have any problem recognizing what's going on when they combine. Let's look at some examples. Here's one from Genesis 44:15. Joseph planted stolen goods on his brothers to pay them back for selling him down to Egypt. And when he caught them, Vayomer lahem Yosef, Ma ha'ma'aseh hazeh asher asitem. Let's start at the end with asitem. Compare. Shmartem, re'item, asitem. Shva under the shin of shmartem, because that heavy suffix tem has pulled the accent all the way down there. Re'item, because of the lamed hey verb, y'all saw. Asitem, with that e sound because it's a lamed hey verb, and a compound shva under the guttural ayin. Asher asitem, which you, masculine plural, did. Different from the strong verb in 2 ways, but it's a regular verb. You can always count on it to do this. And asa is an extremely common verb, so you're going to get used to it very quickly if you aren't already. Our verse has a noun from the same root, ma'aseh. Ma ha'ma'aseh hazeh asher asitem. It's very common to put a mem in front of a root to turn it into a noun. We've seen it before. Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat. Shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? And now you recognize ya'aseh, he will do. But there's mishpat, a noun from the same root as the verb shafat, to judge. And that word in our Joseph verse, ma'aseh, is exactly the same form as mishpat. But the two weak consonants in that root change its shape, again, in a totally predictable way. At the end, because asa is a lamed he root. Ma'a instead of mi at the beginning, because the first consonant is a guttural ayin. The same difference as between yishmor and ya'amod. And for the same reasons. The same difference occurs between the nouns mishpat and ma'aseh. So ma'aseh, something that was done, a deed. Maha ma'aseh hazeh asher asitem. What is this deed that you have done? There are other roots that begin with the guttural and end with hey. Right now, I'm just going to show you one more that's extremely common. It's ayin lamed hey, to go up. Ya'aseh, he will do or he will make. Ya'aleh, he will go up. Let's take a look at Genesis 44:34, where Judah is bargaining with Joseph to take him as a slave instead of Benjamin. Ech e'ele el avi v'hana'ar einenu iti pen er'eva asher yimtza et avi. You remember ech from our questions lesson. How? E'ele, can I go up? Ta'ale, ya'ale, na'ale, but when it's I, it's e'ele because of the aleph. Ech e'ele el avi, how do I go up to my father? V'hana'ar einenu iti, and the boy is not einenu, ein not with a third masculine singular ending, iti, with me. Ech e'ele el avi, v'hana'ar einenu iti. Pen, lest, er'eh, I see or I look, va'ra, I look at the evil, at the ra, asher yimtza et avi, that will find my father. In the imperfect, roots that end in aleph treat it like a guttural, so you have to have an ah. But they also treat it like an aleph, so at the end of a syllable, it's silent. And the short ah, the patach that it otherwise would be, becomes a long ah, a kamatz. We'll look at roots with aleph in depth another time. For right now, yimtza, it will find, et avi, my father. Ech e'ele el avi, v'hana'ar einenu iti, pen er'eh vara asher yimtza et avi. And now, some of the most common lamed hey roots. Bana, to build. Haya, to be. Hara, to get pregnant. Zana, to go astray. Chaya, with a chet, to live, to be alive. Chana, to camp. Chara, to burn with anger. Kala, to be over. Allah, go up. Ana, answer. Asa, do or make. Pana, turn, the way you do with your panim. Ra'ah with an aleph, to see. Ra'ah with an ayin, to herd sheep. And shata, to drink. If you want to remember ra'ah with an ayin, to herd or to pasture animals, think of Psalm 23, which begins this way. Adonai ro'i, the Lord is my shepherd. Ro'i with an ayin. The ro'eh, ka masculine singular active participle, the shepherder belonging to me, ro'i. And as long as we're here, echsar, first common singular imperfect verb from chet samech resh, to want or to lack. But in this psalm, I shall not lack anything because the Lord is my shepherd. Adonai ro'i with an ayin, lo echsar. And now two phrases to remember from Genesis. One, Genesis 1:3, Vayihi or, and two, from the next verse, Vayar Elohim et haor. There was light, and God saw the light. Vayihi from Haya, and Vayar from Ra'ah with an aleph, to see. Where is the final Hey in each of those verb forms? And equally important, how come these two Lamed Hey verbs have such a completely different shape? The answer is that in this form, the Hey is always apocryphated. I love saying that word. What it means is the Hey is cut off the end of the word. It's not Vayihyeh, but Vayihi. In the third person singular converted imperfect, two things happen. One, the Hey drops off, or it's cut off, apocryphated. And two, it takes on what seems to be an unpredictable shape. There's a reason the Hey is apocryphated, which we'll talk about down the road a ways, but these forms are very common, so in the meantime, you have to get comfortable with them. Here are some of the most common. We've already seen maybe half of them. Vayehi, and it was. Vayechi, and he lived. Vayiven, and he built. Vayichar, and it burned with anger. Vaya'al, and he went up. Vaya'an, and he answered. Vaya'as, and he did or made. Vayesht, and he drank. Vayar, and he saw. Vatere, and she saw. Vatahar, and she conceived, got pregnant. Hey Resh Hey means to conceive, to get pregnant. To finish up today, let's have a look at the beginning of Genesis 4. I promised you a look at the word kaniti, and here it is. V'ha'adam yada et Chava ishto, vatahar vateled et Kain, vatomer kaniti ish et Adonai. Chava is her name, that's Eve in Hebrew. Everything else in that first line you know. Interesting that he is still the generic Adam, while she has her name already. The man knew his wife Eve, knew her, he was intimate with her. Vatahar, and she conceived from Hey Resh Hey, the Hey at the end is apocryphated. Vateled, and she gave birth to, she bore, et Kain, that's his name, Cain. Vatomer, the feminine counterpart to Vayomer. Kaniti ish et Adonai. Kuf nun Hey means to buy something, but more generally to acquire something. And one of the ways to acquire something that you didn't have before is to create something brand new. In Genesis 14, God is twice called Koneh Shamayim Va'aretz. Shamayim Va'aretz you've known since day one, more or less literally. But what is Koneh? Would you recognize it if I changed it to Koneh? I sure hope so, because that is what the kal, masculine singular, active participle of a lamed he verb looks like. Boneh, a builder. Ro'eh, a seer. Koneh, a buyer, or more generally, someone who acquires something. In this case, by creating it. And that's an unusual feature of lamed he roots. Usually in a construct form, we expect a shorter vowel than in the absolute form, but that characteristic ending that marks lamed he roots, segol he, is the shorter vowel, while in the construct form, these lamed he nouns end instead in tsere he, a longer vowel. There's something about that tsere as the last vowel in a word that says construct. So, koneh shamayim va'aretz, creator of heaven and earth. Now, back to Genesis 4, kaniti ish et Adonai, I have created a man with the Lord. Ish is the direct object here, so et can't be the direct object marker, must have its other meaning of with. Together with the Lord, says Eve, I have produced an ish, a person, the first human being after the two of us. And now you know why she said this after giving birth to Cain. It is the explanation of his name. Kaniti, I have produced, et Cain, Cain. The verb explains the name. I haven't explained the verb vateled, and she gave birth, because that's the subject of our next lecture. Sneak preview, since we've seen the word yeled, a child, you might guess that the root of this verb is yud lamed dalet. A child in Hebrew is someone who was born. Much, much more about that next time. In the little bit of time we have left, I want to take a quick look at verse 2b. 2a, Cain's brother Hevel, Abel, is born. Vayehi Hevel ro'eh tzon, ve'Cain haya oved adama. Vayehi Hevel, and Abel was ro'eh tzon. Ro'eh with an ayin and a tsere he, participle, construct form. He was a herder of tzon, a collective noun for flocks, sheep and goats. If you want to talk about larger animals, cattle, your collective noun is bakar. Sheep and cattle, tzon uvakar. Tzon uvakar, Abel was a shepherd, ve'Cain haya oved adama, and Cain was oved, kal, masculine singular active participle, in the construct, from the same root that gave us eved, slave, oved, a worker of adama, the ground, just like his dad, ha'adam. And the farmer and the rancher should be friends. Let's let it go at that. Your Numbers 22 challenge this time, obviously, is to find at least 5 examples of lamed he verbs. Extra points if you find a root we haven't seen yet. Next time, we'll take a much closer look at that verb vateled. See you then.